In the rolling hills of Kentucky, where time moves to the rhythm of horses' hooves and the changing seasons, Miller's Haven is more than just a farm. It is a sanctuary where healing happens not only for the animals, but for the people who care for them. This is the place where Max, an elderly bobcat who has spent more than a decade coexisting peacefully with farm life, found a new purpose. He becomes a guardian, a protector, a symbol of compassion in a world governed by survival. No one had ever seen such an unlikely bond between predator and prey, and no one could explain why Max seemed to take on the role of a surrogate parent. Stay with us as we unfold the heartwarming journey of Max and Buddy. You won't believe what happens next. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories.
The morning sun filtered through the weathered boards of the stable, casting long, golden rectangles across the hay-strewn floor. Sarah Miller wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her forehead. At 58, she had spent more than half her life on this 80-acre farm nestled in the rolling hills of Kentucky's bluegrass region. Her husband Tom had passed 5 years earlier, but Sarah continued their shared dream, maintaining Miller's Haven as both a working horse farm and a sanctuary for local wildlife. Her muscles ached from the long night spent in the stable. Daisy, one of their prized quarter horses, had given birth just before midnight, a beautiful colt with a white star-shaped patch on his forehead. Sarah had named him Buddy, a cheerful name that matched his alert eyes and the eager way he'd initially tried to stand on wobbly legs. But just hours after the birth, Daisy had collapsed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah had called the vet immediately. Dr. Jensen arrived within the hour, but despite their combined efforts, they couldn't save Daisy. An unforeseen complication, a ruptured artery, had taken her quickly. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," Dr. Jensen had said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes these things happen without warning. There was nothing you could have done." But that offered little comfort now as Sarah looked at the orphaned foal, too young to understand that his mother was gone, but somehow sensing that his world had shifted irrevocably. Buddy lay curled in the corner of the stall, his thin legs tucked beneath him, his eyes half closed. "He needs colostrum within the first 24 hours, Dr. Jensen had explained before leaving. "I've left you the formula and instructions. You'll need to bottle feed him every 2 hours. It won't be easy, Sarah. Not all orphan foals make it." Sarah sighed, running her fingers through her silver-streaked hair. She had bottle-raised foals before, but it had been years, and she'd been younger then, with Tom by her side. Now she was alone, responsible for the entire farm and all its inhabitants. "We'll manage, little one," she whispered to Buddy, gently stroking his soft muzzle. His response was a weak nicker, barely audible in the quiet stable. As the morning progressed, Sarah prepared the special formula Dr. Jensen had provided, holding the bottle at the proper angle as she coaxed the foal to drink. Buddy took only a small amount before turning away, his eyes dull with what she could only interpret as grief. "Come on, sweet boy," she urged. "You need your strength." Sarah was so focused on the foal that she didn't notice the silent observer in the shadowy corner of the stable until a soft thump drew her attention. There, sitting alertly on a nearby bale of hay, was Max, the elderly bobcat who had been a part of Miller's Haven for nearly 15 years. Max had come to them as a tiny orphaned cub, barely a month old, his mother killed by a car on the nearby highway. Sarah and Tom had raised him by hand, intending to release him back into the wild when he was old enough. But Max had never fully taken to the wildlife. He'd venture into the surrounding woods for days at a time, but he'd always return to the farm, seeming to prefer the quiet routine of farm life and the occasional bowl of cat food Sarah would leave on the back porch. Over the years, Max had maintained an aloof but peaceful coexistence with the farm's other animals. He never bothered the chickens or barn cats, and while the horses would occasionally snort nervously when he passed, they'd grown accustomed to his presence. Still, he'd never shown any particular interest in them until now. Sarah watched with surprise as Max surveyed the scene, his tawny eyes taking in the foal's dejected posture and Sarah's concerned expression. Bobcats were typically solitary, elusive creatures, but Max had always been different. Years of human interaction had given him a unique understanding of the farm's rhythms and its inhabitants. "Hello, Max," Sarah said softly. "Come to see our newest addition?" The bobcat blinked slowly, then settled more comfortably on the hay bale, tucking his paws beneath him. His grizzled face, once a vibrant pattern of russet and gray, now faded with age, remained impassive, but his eyes never left the foal. Sarah continued her attempts to feed Buddy, acutely aware of Max's unwavering attention. After another few minutes of coaxing, the foal finally took a proper amount of formula, and Sarah felt a small surge of hope. She gently wiped his muzzle and prepared to leave, planning to return in 2 hours for the next feeding. "Keep an eye on him, will you?" she said to Max, half joking. The bobcat simply twitched his ear in response. Sarah returned to the farmhouse, leaving the stable door ajar as she always did during the day. She made herself a quick breakfast, then collapsed into bed for a brief nap before the next feeding. When her alarm buzzed 2 hours later, she dragged herself back to the stable, formula in hand. What she found stopped her in her tracks. Max had moved from his perch on the hay bale and was now sitting just outside Buddy's stall, his back straight, his posture attentive. The foal, meanwhile, had struggled to his feet and was standing on shaky legs, his nose extended toward the bobcat, curiosity momentarily overriding his grief. Sarah held her breath, unsure whether to intervene. While Max had never shown aggression toward the farm animals, he was still a wild predator by nature. But something in the bobcat's demeanor reassured her. There was no tension in his body, no predatory focus. If anything, he seemed almost protective, his presence somehow encouraging the foal's tentative movements. "Well, I'll be," Sarah murmured, approaching slowly to avoid startling either animal. "What's going on here, you two?" At the sound of her voice, Max glanced up but didn't move from his post. Buddy turned his attention to Sarah and the bottle she carried, nickering softly, a stronger sound than she'd heard from him earlier. The feeding went better this time. Buddy drained nearly the entire bottle, his appetite seemingly awakened by his brief interaction with the bobcat. When he'd finished, Sarah checked him over, noting with relief that his temperature was normal and his eyes looked clearer. "That's a good boy," she praised, stroking his neck. "Keep fighting." Over the next few days, a remarkable pattern emerged. Max appeared in the stable during every feeding, watching silently as Sarah tended to Buddy. Between feedings, Sarah would often find the bobcat sitting near the foal's stall, sometimes cleaning his paws or dozing in the filtered sunlight, but always within sight of the young horse. By the 4th day, Buddy had gained enough strength to explore his stall more confidently, occasionally nudging Max through the slats when the bobcat sat nearby. For his part, Max tolerated these interactions with surprising patience, sometimes even responding with a gentle headbutt against the foal's inquiring muzzle. Word of this unusual relationship spread quickly through the small farming community. Sarah's neighbors, initially skeptical, came to witness the phenomenon themselves. "Never seen anything like it," declared Bill Harmon, who owned the neighboring cattle ranch. "That bobcat's acting like a surrogate parent." "Animals are smarter than we give them credit for," replied his wife, Eleanor. "That old cat knows the foal needs looking after." Dr. Jensen returned for a follow-up visit and was amazed by Buddy's progress. "He's doing remarkably well for an orphaned foal," he commented. "Usually they decline without their mothers, even with the best human care. They need companionship of their own kind." "Well, he's got Max," Sarah said, gesturing to the bobcat, who was observing the examination from his usual spot. Dr. Jensen shook his head in wonder. "I've been a vet for 30 years, and I've never seen an interspecies bond quite like this one. That Bobcat seems to have appointed himself guardian. As the days turned into weeks, Buddy continued to thrive. Sarah gradually reduced the bottle feedings as the foal began to graze on the soft hay in his stall. She also introduced him to Willow, a gentle older mare who had shared the stable with Daisy. While Buddy initially showed little interest in the other horse, preferring the company of his unusual feline friend, he eventually began to form a tentative bond with Willow as well. Max, for his part, seemed to sense when his presence was needed most. He would disappear into the woods for short hunting expeditions, but always returned, particularly in the evenings when the stable grew quiet and Buddy seemed most restless, missing the warmth and security of his mother. On one such evening, about a month after Daisy's passing, Sarah was walking back to the farmhouse after the last feeding when she heard a commotion from the stable. Rushing back, she found Buddy in distress, pacing his stall and whinnying anxiously. Max was notably absent, and Sarah wondered if this was the cause of the foal's agitation. She spent over an hour trying to calm Buddy, stroking his neck and speaking soothingly, but nothing seemed to help. Eventually, exhausted, she pulled up a stool and sat beside the stall, keeping the foal company as best she could. Just before midnight, a familiar shape slipped through the stable door. Max trotted in, something small and dark dangling from his mouth. Sarah recognized it immediately, a field mouse, likely caught during his evening hunt. The Bobcat dropped his prize near the entrance, then proceeded to Buddy's stall. The effect on the foal was immediate. His anxious pacing ceased, and he nickered softly in greeting. Max settled into his usual spot, and within minutes, Buddy had also lain down, his breathing evening out as he drifted into sleep. Sarah shook her head in amazement. "You two are something else," she whispered, leaving them to their peaceful companionship. The following day brought unexpected visitors to Miller's Haven. Sarah was mucking out one of the empty stalls when she heard a car coming up the gravel driveway. Looking out, she saw a familiar van with Kentucky Wildlife Department emblazoned on its side. Her heart sank. She'd been expecting this visit ever since word of Max and Buddy's unusual relationship had spread through the community. While she had the proper permits to keep rescued wildlife on her property as part of her sanctuary status, there were always those who believed wild animals should remain fully wild, regardless of circumstances. Two officials emerged from the van, a middle-aged man in a pressed uniform and a younger woman carrying a tablet. Sarah recognized the man as James Wilson, a wildlife officer she'd dealt with in the past. "Morning, Sarah," Wilson called, approaching the stable. "Got a report about that Bobcat of yours." Sarah straightened, brushing hay from her jeans. "Max has been with us for 15 years, James. You know that. All my permits are in order." Wilson held up a placating hand. "Not here about permits. Got a call from someone concerned about the Bobcat and the foal. Said it might be a dangerous situation." The younger woman stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Emily Chun, wildlife behaviorist. We'd like to observe the interaction, if possible." Sarah relaxed slightly. "They're both inside. Come see for yourselves." She led them into the stable, where Max and Buddy were engaged in what had become their morning routine. The foal was nibbling at fresh hay while Max watched from a nearby perch, occasionally stretching or changing position, but never straying far. Dr. Chin's eyes widened. "Remarkable," she murmured, pulling out her tablet to take notes. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah explained the situation: Daisy's sudden death, Buddy's initial decline, and Max's unexpected intervention. As she spoke, Buddy finished his hay and ambled over to the edge of his stall nearest Max, extending his muzzle toward the Bobcat. Max responded by standing, stretching languidly, then approaching to touch noses briefly with the foal. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chin said, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Bobcats are solitary predators. They don't form social bonds like this, especially not with prey species." Max was hand-raised, Sarah pointed out. He's never been fully wild. And he's getting on in years now. He's at least 15, maybe older. He's mellowed. Wilson watched the animals thoughtfully. Still, there are concerns. What happens when the foal gets bigger? Will the bobcat still see it as something to protect, or might those predatory instincts kick in? Max has lived alongside horses his entire life, Sarah said firmly. He's never shown the slightest aggression toward them. If anything, he's behaving more like a parent than a predator. Dr. Chun continued to observe and take notes. The bobcat's body language is relaxed, non-threatening, and the foal clearly trusts him. She turned to Sarah. Would you mind if I came back over the next few weeks to document this? It could be valuable research for understanding cross-species bonding and the effects of early socialization on predator behavior. Sarah agreed readily, seeing an ally in the young scientist. Wilson seemed less convinced, but eventually nodded. We'll leave things as they are for now, he decided. But I'll be checking in regularly. And at the first sign of any issue. There won't be, Sarah interrupted confidently. But you're welcome anytime. After the officials left, Sarah returned to find Max and Buddy exactly as they'd been, the bobcat watchful but calm, the foal growing stronger by the day. She smiled, grateful for the reprieve but aware that Max and Buddy's unusual relationship would continue to draw attention. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chin became a regular presence at the farm, documenting the evolving bond between the unlikely pair. Her research brought a steady stream of visitors, other wildlife experts, veterinarians, even a documentary filmmaker who spent 3 days capturing footage of Max and Buddy's interactions. What you have here is extraordinary, the filmmaker told Sarah. It challenges everything we think we know about natural enemies and instinctive behaviors. Sarah took it all in stride. To her, there was nothing particularly mysterious about what was happening. Max, despite his wild nature, had been shaped by his upbringing among humans and domestic animals. He'd recognized vulnerability in the orphaned foal and responded with compassion rather than predatory interest. It was unusual, certainly, but not incomprehensible to anyone who had spent a lifetime observing animals. As spring turned to summer, Buddy continued to grow and strengthen. By July, he was ready to spend short periods in the small paddock adjacent to the stable, taking his first tentative steps into the wider world. Sarah watched anxiously during these outings, unsure how Max would react to the foal's increasing independence. She needn't have worried. The elderly bobcat adapted to this new phase with the same quiet vigilance he'd shown from the beginning. He would find a comfortable spot on the fence or under a nearby tree, grooming himself casually while keeping a watchful eye on the foal's explorations. One warm afternoon, Sarah was sitting on the porch with a glass of lemonade, watching Buddy frolic in the paddock with increasing confidence. Max was perched on a fence post, seemingly dozing in the sun, but, she knew, alert to every movement the foal made. The peaceful scene was interrupted by the arrival of a sleek SUV coming up the driveway. Sarah recognized it immediately. It belonged to her daughter Jessica, who lived in Louisville with her husband and 2 children. The vehicle had barely stopped before the back doors flew open and her grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Liam, tumbled out, racing toward her with excited shouts. "Grandma, Grandma, we came to see the bobcat and the horse," Emma called, her braids bouncing as she ran. Sarah laughed, rising to embrace them both. "Well, hello to you too. What a wonderful surprise." Jessica approached more sedately, smiling apologetically. "Sorry for dropping in unannounced, Mom. The kids have been begging to see this miraculous friendship ever since they saw that video online." "Video?" Sarah asked, puzzled. Jessica pulled out her phone. "You haven't seen it? Someone posted footage of Max and Buddy, and it's gone viral. Over 2 million views already." She handed Sarah the phone, showing a professionally edited clip, clearly taken from the documentary filmmaker's footage, of Max grooming himself beside Buddy's stall while the foal rested his head near the bobcat, both creatures perfectly at ease in each other's company. The caption read, Elderly Bobcat adopts orphaned foal in heartwarming twist of nature. Sarah shook her head, amazed. Well, I'll be. Fame has come to Miller's Haven. The children were already at the paddock fence, pointing excitedly at Buddy and trying to spot Max, who had retreated to a more distant perch at the commotion of their arrival. Can we pet the horse, Grandma? Please, Liam begged. Let's give him a little time to get used to you first, Sarah suggested. He's still young and learning about the world. Why don't we sit quietly by the fence, and he might come over to investigate? The children nodded solemnly, taking their grandmother's guidance seriously. They settled on the grass near the fence, whispering to each other and occasionally giggling, but mostly watching with rapt attention as Buddy gradually overcame his initial wariness and approached. Jessica joined Sarah on a nearby bench. How are you doing, Mom? Really? This place is a lot for one person to manage. Sarah smiled, touched by her daughter's concern. I'm managing just fine. The Miller's Haven Wildlife Fund has really taken off since that documentary crew came through. We've received enough donations to hire a part-time helper. Young Tyler from down the road comes 3 afternoons a week now. That's wonderful, Jessica said. But I worry about you out here alone. Maybe it's time to consider selling? Moving to the city? Sarah finished. Not yet, Jess. This place still has life in it. So do I. They were interrupted by delighted squeals from the children. Buddy had approached the fence and was cautiously extending his muzzle toward Emma's outstretched hand. Even more surprisingly, Max had reappeared, watching the interaction from a careful distance. Look, Mommy, the Bobcat is watching us, Liam exclaimed. Stay calm and move slowly, Sarah advised. Max is very cautious around new people. The children nodded, entranced by the dual presence of the young horse and his unlikely guardian. For the next hour, they remained by the fence, gradually winning Buddy's trust with gentle voices and careful pats. Max maintained his distance, but seemed to relax as he observed the children's gentle interaction with his charge. As the afternoon waned, Jessica reluctantly gathered the children for the drive back to Louisville, promising they would visit again soon. Maybe we could come for a whole weekend next time, she suggested. The kids could help around the farm. I'd like that very much, Sarah agreed, hugging them all goodbye. That evening, as Sarah completed the last feeding and prepared to close up the stable for the night, she found Max in his usual spot near Buddy's stall. The foal was already half asleep, his long legs folded beneath him on the fresh straw. You've become quite the celebrity, old fellow, she told the Bobcat, who blinked lazily in response. Who would have thought an old farm Bobcat and an orphaned foal would capture so many hearts? She settled onto her usual stool, tired but content after the busy day. You know, when Tom died, I wasn't sure I could keep this place going. It felt too big, too empty without him. Max watched her steadily, his amber eyes reflective in the dim light. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Filling empty spaces with new purposes. The Bobcat stretched, yawned, and settled more comfortably on his perch. Outside, the first crickets of evening began their chorus, a familiar soundtrack to countless summer nights on the farm. Sarah watched as Buddy drifted fully into sleep, his breathing deep and even, his white star marking just visible in the fading light. Nearby, Max also closed his eyes, though Sarah knew he remained alert, ever vigilant in his self-appointed role. You two have taught me something important, she said softly. Life goes on, in unexpected ways. Connections form where you least expect them. And sometimes, the most unlikely friendships turn out to be exactly what we need. In the comfortable silence that followed, broken only by the soft breathing of the sleeping foal and the distant chorus of night creatures, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since losing Tom. Miller's Haven was more than just a farm or a sanctuary. It was a place of healing, not only for the animals she rescued, but for herself as well. As if sensing her thoughts, Max opened one eye, regarding her with what she could only interpret as understanding. Sarah smiled, rose from her stool, and patted the bobcat gently on his grizzled head, a liberty he allowed from very few people. "Good night, old friend," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding me that there's always room for wonder in this world." She left the stable door ajar, as she always did on summer nights, allowing the cool air to circulate. Looking back one last time, she saw Max settle his head on his paws, his watchful gaze fixed on the sleeping foal, a guardian, a friend, a testament to nature's endless capacity to surprise and adapt. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new challenges, new opportunities to share the story of Max and Buddy with a world hungry for tales of unlikely connections and selfless devotion. But for tonight, all was peaceful at Miller's Haven, where an elderly bobcat and a once-dying foal had forged a bond that defied explanation yet felt, somehow, perfectly natural. In the soft Kentucky night, beneath a canopy of stars that had witnessed countless generations of life on this land, the improbable family slept, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged, together.